We got a chance to speak to some of the people behind the brand new Nat Geo documentary Ocean with David Attenborough. Check out our conversation with director producer Toby Nowlan and scientific advisor, National Geographic explorer, and executive producer Enric Sala. I absolutely loved Ocean. I grew up watching these documentaries on Nat Geo and the BBC, and I've been obsessed with them ever since. And I was just speaking to Keith and Colin, and I was bugging them for, to pull back the curtain and tell me how it's done, because I think that's the question I always have about how you shoot the things you shoot. And Toby, I'm curious about. I get the underwater stuff and the coral reefs and the sharks and all of that stuff, but what about the trawlers and the stuff you're not supposed to be shooting, or it feels like you're not supposed to be shooting? How do you get that footage?
Can I ask, Umar, can I throw that back with a question? Why do you think that we're not supposed to be filming it?
I think you're not supposed to be filming it because the people who do it don't want you filming it.
Well, it's interesting you say that. We're talking about a process that was devised and invented off the coast of England here. It's 700 years ago in the 14th century, and it's continued hidden from view for all that time, 700
Wow.
years without anyone knowing, and in an extremely common way. We're talking about something that's happening thousands of times around the ocean. It's as common as something like ploughing on land, but can be as devastating as bulldozing your local ancient woodland or the Amazon rainforest. It's extraordinary that something like that has remained hidden from view. And it's equally extraordinary that it wasn't until a wildlife film crew have attached cameras to dredging equipment that we could see the process just as it's happening. I mean, the fishing industry has had 700 years to do that if they wanted to. I mean, it's kind of bonkers for a wildlife film crew to be left to do the first basic monitoring and reveal of a process that is extremely commonplace. And from our standpoint, all we wanted to do in the David Attenborough world is to show the process as it is. We're not actually criticizing the process. We're showing people the devastation and the violence the images speak for themselves. The facts and the lines speak for themselves. There's nothing critical there. It's all just explaining it as it is. So that was the mission, to really just reveal and rip the blindfold off and give it to people in front of them. How did we film it? There's a lot of technical challenges. You're overcoming difficulties with low light and
Right.
depth. And you can imagine all the movement down
The
there, all the
vibration.
turbulence and the violence of this process. You can really see it in these shots. So you can imagine there's a lot of camera loss and housing breakage. And so it took a long period of technological development to get there. And it's wonderful that the camera tech at the moment allows that we're at a place where we can get to that. But yes, it was a long old process, and I think the images are really important. They're clearly rippling around the world. That 90-second clip on Instagram, tens of millions of people now have seen it, so it's clearly having a big reaction. And we always knew it would, even for us filmmakers, when we saw those images for the first time. The violence of it was so shocking. We knew it was bad,
Yeah.
but until the human mind can see it in front of them, clear as day, you can't really relate to the process.
No, and you're absolutely right. Sir David has that line about the logging of rainforests. And of course, I come from a part of the world where we're constantly trying to fight that.
Yeah.
And yet, people meet that with outrage, but nobody knows about the effects trawling has. And I think it's because we haven't had the visuals to show us. And I think that is probably one of the most impactful things about the movie, which just left me agape and aghast, right? Um, I was wondering if you could talk to me about, like, the thing I didn't understand about that whole process. I don't know if you can fill me in on, Rick, is the logic behind the wastage.
Yes.
Because for me, that makes very little economic sense. Why wouldn't you just find different avenues to get rid of all of the stuff you trawl? Why dump everything?
Bottom trawling makes very little economic sense. In most countries, it's propped up by government subsidies, using taxpayers' money because it's a business of diminishing returns. Usually, most trawlers go after a few select species, shrimp, for example, or some bottom fish. If you use this net that scrape to the bottom of the ocean, the net catches everything that is in there, right? So if the trawler is a shrimp trawler, everything that is not shrimp, that cannot be sold in the market, like all these small fish and starfish, rays, sponges, all of this is not commercially important to them, so they throw it overboard. There is a story of the Minister of Fisheries of Gabon in West Africa going on board the Sea Shepherd's vessel and boarding a shrimp trawler. The minister had never been on a trawler before, and
Right.
they found that 98% of the catch was not shrimp. 98% of the catch was discarded overboard, dead. And right there, the Minister of Fisheries decided that there is no more shrimp trawling in Gabon, right? So that's why it's because it's not selective. It's like clear cutting the tropical forest to catch a few species of birds.
Yeah, no, that it was outrageous. There was so much about the show that took me by surprise, and I think one of the interesting things you guys do, Toby, is you frame the narrative as something different from what we've seen in the past, in the sense that in the past we've had all of these documentaries that kind of frame the narrative as, look at the beautiful world we live in. How could you possibly destroy this? And that messaging is powerful, but it hasn't seemed to work. And I think what's interesting about what you guys have done is bring in the human stories and show it to us from their perspectives, because those are the people living it. And the capitalists will say, well, we got to fish, overfish. If not, how are we going to feed everyone? And then we don't see the impact on the actual people. And could you talk to me about why you decided to put that messaging in?
Well, that's wonderful. You've noticed all of that, so thank you. Um, Absolutely. It was really important from the get-go. What really excited me about this film is how it was not like other natural history TV documentaries that had come before, which, as you say, focus on natural history, new natural history behaviors, and then might at the end, look at the beautiful world, and then at the end say, "Oh, P.S. By the way, climate change is ruining all this. We're kind of all
Right.
screwed. We better up our game, right?" It doesn't really empower you with much, does it? So we were always on this sort of tightrope of like, we want to show people beauty, but there needs to be some bit of mission in there. But the mission was very rarely tangible. And often going in a lot of different areas, a film about the ocean, as an example, might have been every single thing that was wrong with the ocean. Let's do plastics, let's
Right.
do pollution, let's do every form of fishing, let's do deep sea mining, let's do climate change, let's do everything. It doesn't leave you with a clear plan. So this was really, really exciting, this premise, because this was a very clear story. We're talking about what we've discovered in the ocean, the huge things we've discovered in the ocean in David Attenborough's lifetime, 100 years, the last 100 years,
100
this
years.
century was
Yeah.
incredible as a sort of framework. And then we're talking about the most immediate and fixable problems with our ocean, which is the most destructive forms of industrial fishing, especially these are happening in our protected areas, in our so-called protected areas, right? And that if we stop that and we actually do protect a big slice of the ocean, the recovery is huge, potentially huge. And well, not potentially huge, it is huge. It's already happening. We're seeing it in all these examples around the world. So you have this gift of this gorgeous narrative that leads to this very clear solution that's already happening. It's not a dream, it's not a possibility, it's real and it's tangible and it really, really works. And even as a filmmaker, when I started making the film, that realization that and I've spent my life working with wildlife, but that realization that when you protect the ocean, the process of recovery is very different to what happens on land. It's much
Yeah.
quicker, it's much more spectacular, and it does everything for you. All you've got to do is just not fish that bit, and it fills the surrounding area with life. How amazing is that? That doesn't sound like a huge amount of work, and everyone's a winner. We get a more breathable atmosphere, we get a more stable climate, we get booming coastal fishing economies, we get an ocean more full of abundance and marine life than we'd ever dreamt possible. what a win is that? So, in terms of the story, there's an amazing payoff there. The requirement was that we had to stay laser focused on the goal, on the narrative. So it was often tempting to go, oh, but should we talk about plastic? Should we go down the pollution route? Should we go down? It's like, no, let's focus on what can really turn the tide here. This could change next week if people
Right.
decided to. And this film is strategically being launched just before the this huge conference, the biggest ever of its kind, Ocean Conference in Nice in June, when the global leaders will come together. There's a real opportunity to jump on this and create a moment and a piece of history. So it was about staying focused on that and keeping the story real and the solution real.
No, and I think you're right. It's not some ambiguous goal in the future. That's why it works so well. And a lot of that has to do with these visuals of the trawlers, but also, Enric, I wanted to ask you about phytoplankton and just how being able to see them affects the narrative. Because I think once you have that visual, it's easier to understand what they look like and what they do.
Yes, absolutely. You're absolutely right, Uma. And Toby and I were talking about that before. I'm so lucky that I've been diving for 38 years now. I'm older than I look, hopefully. I've been working on ocean conservation for 35 years. And I've been very privileged to been to some of the wildest places in the ocean, from the poles to the tropics. I've seen these bait balls that Toby so brilliant and the team so brilliantly filmed, and the whales and sharks, but I had never seen the lobster larvae from California,
Yeah.
right? What the team has done so well is to be able to get us down to the level of the plankton. It's not talking about plankton and imagining it in the water, or seeing microscope images, right? For the first time, we're able to see these lobster larvae at the same level. So even me, after spending more than half of my life and at sea, wow, that was like I discovered a new universe. To be able
Yeah.
to be at the same level, at the same size, I felt what it is like to be a larva in the plankton, and thinking, wow, I'm transparent. Hopefully, the predators will not see me, and I have to be in the water for 10 to 12 months. And if I survive, then I'll go down and become a little lobster. So I cannot imagine what those images have done for people who are not lucky like we are to spend so much time underwater.
Yeah.
And I
No,
guess if I can just add to that, Uma, it all comes back to this power of visual storytelling and film, right? Like people seeing these bottom trawling images for the first time and seeing the damage. And again, the
yeah.
lobster larvae, part of the reason I guess that spillover has never been sort of perceived en masse by the public. Certainly, this was my perception. I wasn't really aware of it. It had never been broken down to me in a very clear cinematic way. I'd never seen it on screen in a very accessible way. So I was very keen to find a sequence that showed this and also tied to the relevance of fishing and biodiversity. But larvae dispersal, if we could film it, you could actually see the process of spillover. And then we used these graphics, these maps to just show the scale of this on a global scale, of these it literally just the ocean filling up with life. So it all comes back to that power of film.
Yeah. No, you preempted my next question because, Enric, I'm one of those people. I have a crippling fear of water. My parents tell me something happened when I was a kid, and I just crippling fear of water. But my access has been fiction and non. As a child, I don't know if you remember this, Toby. There was a terrible science fiction series on TV called Sequest, which I was obsessed with.
Yeah.
And I say terrible because it went to weird places. But the first season, every episode would end with Bob Ballard talking to you about the real science behind what happened in the TV show, however crazy and fictional it might be. And so I think there is a real power to the narrative in fiction and nonfiction. I was hoping you talked about that conference, Toby. What are you hoping will happen, like with Ocean? I guess if anyone can convince anyone, it's Sir David, right?
Well, exactly. That's the whole game, right? I mean, he's shown us the natural world for 100 years, nearly. He's been living that long, and he's the most trusted name and voice out there. And when David Attenborough says something, you know it's real. You know you can trust it. It means truth. It means trust. And David has always been extremely careful about what projects he does and every word that he says. So this is a big deal for him. This is his most important story, his greatest message he's ever told. Certainly the most powerful words I've ever heard him say, especially those last closing lines of the film.
Yeah.
You know, if we save our sea, we save our world. Really reaches inside me every time. So it doesn't get bigger than this. It's his most personal and authored piece. So Enric is going to be presenting the film to the world at UNOC, and the whole mission here is that the world listens, and we can just do our best with that. But the hope is protect a third of the ocean, right?
Yep. And
Yeah.
so we're going to use the film to, we have all the science and the economics, right? The countries of the world agreed to protect at least 30% of the ocean by 2030. So all the stuff for the brain, we have it. Right? And we are working hard. We know that at the UN Ocean Conference, we're working with several governments that will come to Nice and make announcements of new marine protected areas. And some countries will commit to phase out bottom trawling in marine protected areas in their waters. But it's not going to be enough. Only a few countries are going to actually deliver. That's what happens in these UN conferences. But now, with this film, people will be able to see it. So we'll reach to people's hearts and guts, because the bottom trawling footage gets you in the gut. And the message of hope at the end, showing that the ocean can bounce back to life, that reached your heart. So we hope that now establishing this emotional connection with the ocean, what we're doing to it, and the potential for recovery, will make people listen to all the arguments for the brain of why and how fast we need to protect 30% of the ocean. By the
Fantastic.
way,
Gentlemen,
Uma, is
yes.
your sign? Can I ask you a question? Your sign belief, is that Ted Lasso's inspired?
Yes, it is. It is Ted Lasso. It is actually, it's from Apple. They sent me the sign.
Oh, okay, so we
Which,
believe it's possible because we have
no,
seen we have seen it. We have seen it in many countries. We know some countries have already protected 30% of their waters or more before 2030. So we believe it's possible. There you go.
yeah. No, and it's exactly what you were saying, Toby. It's just convincing people and showing them. And I think what Sir David does, and the exciting thing, I'm all out of time, but the exciting thing about watching Sir David every time is that he feels like he's learning something new. Like nothing is old hat to him. And that makes you believe as well, because you're learning new stuff. So, yes, thank you so much for this, and congratulations and all the best. Good luck. I hope
Thank you.
good comes from it.
Thank you so
Thanks
much,
so
Uma.
Cheers.
The ocean. Our final frontier.
Ocean with David Attenborough is now streaming on Disney Plus Hotstar. Check it out. Let us know what you think. It'll change the way you see the world. Sound off in the comments, and thank you so much for watching.